Hello, and welcome to our 6th edition of What Matters Most here in Londonderry, New Hampshire. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are going to dedicate this entire time talking about Black history because it's Black History Month. It's the month of February. This is February 2022. And I am bringing this to you because I actually thought that we could get somebody from New Hampshire to come and talk to us about the history of Black people in New Hampshire and in America. What are their contributions? Again, my name is Luisa and you're watching What Matters Most. Welcome to our show, and I have the pleasure of introducing you to our guest today is Michael Ward. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Hello, folks.
Yes, I'm so glad you're here, and I have been following Mike for quite a while. He's very active in social media, posting some of his work and his poems. His biography is wonderful. He's a retired software engineer.
Yes, I am.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
And after that, he dedicated himself to writing. He's written a couple of books, and he's been involved in helping to develop curriculum, portions of curriculum for schools, or curricula for schools, dedicated to teaching Black history. And Black history, in my view, is the history of America. It's all intertwined. There's no such thing as black and white. We're all together. It's just the pigmentation that differentiates between Americans. And Michael, can I come to you to sort of explain how this works? We're all Americans. We're talking about Black History Month. What's your take on it?
Well, I'll have to go back and ask from inside my head. I'll have to ask my father, and that is his view of America after being a veteran of World War II with a Purple Heart. When people were protesting against the Vietnam War, he said, "I don't like that they're burning the flag. My best friend died, and I bled almost to death so that they could have the right to do that." And that's something that seems to be forgotten when you start looking at the various shades of politics from the far right to the far left. It seems as though the basic premise of America, diversity and strength through diversity, and not necessarily all voices singing the same note.
That's right.
But all voices singing or not. And when we get into a situation where we have people who, for one reason or another, wish to maintain their particular status or sense of self, well, that's okay as long as in doing that, you don't constrain someone else. And that has been the fundamental issue with Black America.
I agree.
We can state it at a very simple way to say, if Black Americans were afforded the legal rights vouchsafed in the 14th Amendment, due process and equal justice under the law, we wouldn't have a lot of these problems.
Absolutely.
Now,
our
the
laws,
Fourth Amendment,
our laws are there.
Yeah.
And, the Constitution is there for everybody. The Constitution does not say this is a Constitution for white America. It says it's a Constitution for all Americans.
That's true.
And that's why I like having someone like you who's had time to think about this, because you were busy working as a software engineer, and when you retired, you decided to give back to your community by teaching the history of not only Black people, of how Americans work together to build the America of today.
Well, I have to admit, I ended up becoming a writer because 6 weeks before he passed on, my father asked me to write the stories of our family because we went through a pretty incredible time. We left Brooklyn, New York to escape gang violence. I was 4, my brother was 14. My dad was on a ship in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, about 90 miles away. And I was beaten up for my candy and left crying on the sidewalk after a sharp knee to the nads. And a pair of boys beat up my brother and took his paper route money. So that was bad. But then we caught someone looking in the window at my 7-year-old sister at 1 in the afternoon. Now, I don't care what national origin, race, or if you're from outer space. If you see your kids being abused, you have to do something about it.
Absolutely.
And he did.
He did.
So what he did, of course, was move us. And we could not move down south because Emmett Till had been slaughtered 2 years before. And moving north was an unknown. It was known there was very little Klan activity in New Hampshire.
Right.
And my parents could vote. Now, that may not seem like such a big deal, but understanding the path of black Americans to full citizenship requires that we be able to vote.
Absolutely.
And if they move south, that was not guaranteed. So when we moved to Lee, New Hampshire in 1957 to a dirt road.
Lee, New Hampshire, is that next to Exeter?
No, it's next to Durham.
Okay.
And Newmarket. It's close.
My geography is not
It's
that
close.
good, but
Well,
we're
know,
in Londonderry, which is southern New Hampshire. So is that considered northern New Hampshire?
no,
or-
that's southern New Hampshire.
It's also southern New
yeah.
Hampshire. Like
We lived on the second highest hill in Lee, New Hampshire, and from the second story of the house, if you look due east, you could see the runway lights at Pease Air Force Base at night. And then if you went to the western side of the house and looked out on the same latitude, you could see the transmitter tower lights for WENH in Durham on top of Saddleback Mountain in Raymond. Now, of course, if you can see that far in either direction, this is New Hampshire. And what comes down from the north in the winter is monumental. The wind is incredible. It's
the cold is incredible.
It
is cold right
cold,
now.
okay? And that was an experience for us.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
What an amazing story. I just wanted the whole world to hear this because we oftentimes living in New Hampshire, we say it's a white state, there aren't any black people, but we are here, we live here,
Yeah.
we love it, we belong to the community and we contribute to the community as much as anybody else does. And having you here is just incredible. Can we go through a list? Can you name any black inventors that you can think of? I can name a few, but maybe you can talk about, because a lot of people
Yeah.
don't know that the fact that we're saying that we're bringing unity and love to the whole community means that the whole of America has inventors on both sides. And people don't know. Like
Okay.
the light bulb of us.
Yeah.
I can start you with that. There was
Well-
a dispute between Thomas Edison and
Louis
the real
Latimer.
inventor, right?
Louis Latimer. But
Louis Latimer.
Lewis's invention was for the grid to suspend the filament. Because if you run a filament up inside that vacuum tube, little spirals, little wires, you can only have so much power going through that lens before the power itself, and consider the materials they had available, something had to hold it up or it'd heat to a certain point and die. It would die because it had to hold itself up and be heated enough or electrified enough to produce some light. So Lewis invented the grid that supported it.
So that's how we were able to get the light bulb to work. And I heard, because I was doing some research for the show, because it's the Black History Month, that there was a dispute and ended up in court, and he actually beat Thomas Edison.
Yep.
Thomas Edison wanted to take all the credit for it, and he lost in court.
Well, there's also
because he wasn't the real inventor of that.
Well, there's also something
technology.
else. That was after 1884, I believe, because until that time, it wasn't officially stated, but if you were black, you could hold a patent on your own. So there have been, I can't give you a list. I'd have to go back and do more research for that.
There is Google.
But-
Everybody
yeah,
can
right.
Google this.
But the
So-
point is, a lot of inventions by black inventors, I won't say they were co-opted, but they were registered under a white person's name.
Or
It's just the
under
way
an
it went.
X. I heard that woman that invented, I don't know if it was the iron or something, that she couldn't write and
Yep.
had to put an X
Yep.
because blacks were not
Right.
allowed to learn to read and write. And it was a crime. If a white person taught a black person how to read and write, he would or she would be punished.
Well, the
So-
punishment for, well, there's a reason that literacy was not desired among slaves. And if you connect the dots, it makes perfect sense. An escaped slave who can't read can't figure out how to get away because he can't read the road signs
All right,
and he can't read a map.
right.
And
so there's
so
a history behind it.
the fear was, well, if we teach the coloreds, Negroes, or whatever to read, they'll be able to escape. And they'll be able to write down how they escaped and where they went.
Right.
And for the slaves, it was a more pragmatic view. If they could read and write, they could keep track of their family because the practice of breaking up slave families and selling them off like parcels was standard. I have an Uncle great Uncle Clifford, who disappeared, I guess, 1861 to 1863 or whatever. Was sold off because he was difficult. Now, when people think about slavery, they usually think about, well, a slave, he's obedient. Well, what happens to the ones that aren't? I'm from a fractious family on both sides. And they didn't put up with Clifford. They sold him off.
Wow.
But they used to have a Juneteenth that traveled around the country. And my grandmother, Elzina, her mother, Miss Virgie, was the last child in a family of 8 children, but she was born in 1866. So she was born after Clifford was sold.
Oh, wow.
And she told her daughter to find Clifford. So in 1958 or so, Elzina finally got a chance, because she worked, finally got a chance to go to a Juneteenth. And she came back, and she was brokenhearted because she waited too long. The people that were there were so old. Some of them couldn't even say their names.
That's
So
incredible.
when people talk to me about things like, well, my parents, my great-grandparents, you know, they came down from Canada, they were French Canadians, and they worked in the mills and so forth and so on. Or my great-great-grandparents were Irish immigrants and they were treated like crap. All of those things are true. But to the best of my knowledge, none of those relatives or forebears had their families split up, sold off, and became untraceable. And it's that untraceability
That's right.
that really hurts.
That hurts. Yes.
And, you know, it's not like I sit up late at night thinking about Uncle Clifford. But on the other side of the family, my dad's side, I can trace it back to George and Sarah Taylor, born 1850, 1852, and they were slaves for Zachary Taylor, the former president.
Wow.
And I have pictures of them too.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they had,
I would have asked you to bring the pictures. We do show and tell here
Oh,
next time.
okay.
Because I always promise to have my guests back.
All right. And I have, pictures of all 12, 7 maiden aunts and 5 boys. And they were quite the crew. See, after the Civil War, people, black people, if they could, flocked to Washington to work for the federal government.
Oh, that's right. I
And-
noticed that the federal government has
Mm-hmm.
a very big, maybe 20% of the workforce there.
Could be.
And also Washington, D.C. has the highest percentage of black population
Yep.
of any, well, it is a district, the
Yes, it's
District
true.
of Columbia.
Yep.
But it has a very high percentage of educated African Americans that actually work.
Exactly.
A lot of them work for
And
the
it's the
federal
educated,
government.
it's the educated part
Yeah.
that sticks out because, so let's say, as the Joneses did, they got jobs at the U.S. Mint. Now, if you went to work at the U.S. Mint, they would hire you and assess your skills. Well, apparently the Joneses could read and write, because first George got a job, and then Sarah got a job, and then the kids, so they all sort of like marched in and worked at the mint.
Right.
And in that family of 12, let's see, whenever he would play in New York City, Mercer would drop by for dinner, okay? Because they went to middle school to high school with Mercer. That's called Duke Ellington.
Oh, right.
Okay?
Right.
And
Allison.
then some of the Jones boys were Pullman porters, and people look at Pullman porters and say, oh my God, how demeaning. Well, understand, there's demeaning and there's eating and supporting a family.
Right.
And so when you're talking about survival, how are you going to survive? On the bottom or the
Right.
best that you can do?
Exactly. Exactly.
And so there were some Pullman porters, and then there was Othello Branson, my dad's cousin, and he was the first black to practice law before the Supreme Court.
Oh,
He graduated from Howard University in 1927.
I always think that Thurgood Marshall was the first one, but no, not
he was the
quite.
first one to be admitted to the Supreme Court
to
bar.
the Supreme Court bar. Right.
Okay.
Right.
And my dad's family, every generation until mine, went to Howard University.
And that's part of the black colleges, you know,
Yep, historically back, yep,
HBCUs.
yeah. There is a slight issue with that, and it's going to sound strange to you, but one of my sisters applied to Howard, and this is in the late 60s, and they said, well, the admissions counselor talked to her. Don't really know how to say this, but you're not going to fit here.
Huh.
Why? You're too white. And that
Oh.
is the
No,
dichotomy.
you're just touching upon
Yeah.
the skin tone
Yeah.
discrimination.
No, we're talking about
Right?
the enculturation.
Right. Okay.
You know, 12, 13 years in New Hampshire, we were the only black family in the Oyster River School District. So whenever we met black kids from the city or whatever, they're like, because we listened to different music, we didn't speak the same language, we didn't eat the same food, and there was a disconnect. In some cases,
So the culture was more shaped around the white community in which where you lived.
it wasn't shaped, it was hammered. You know, in my case, I have ADHD. Believe me, it was hammered. So, yeah,
Right.
so that's a peculiarity to kids that grow up in New Hampshire in the little towns and then come downstate or out of state. You suddenly find out, wow, I really have to change gears fast here.
Right.
Okay,
Absolutely.
because otherwise I'm not going to make it.
I have to fit in.
Yep.
So let's go to the next inventor.
Mhm.
I so like we talked about a lot of times about traffic lights.
Mm-hmm.
It was invented because an African American person saw an accident and somebody was run over, and he was so distraught that he went and
Yep.
invented the traffic light. Said, and it was about putting us, letting cars
Right.
stop so people could cross. And how did that? Do you know much more about the story behind the traffic lights?
No, I don't, but there was another man, and I'll have to look at my notes to give you his
Sure,
name.
sure.
But his
I
daughter
actually have it.
saw someone fall down an elevator shaft. Now, Mr. Otis,
That's the elevator,
yep,
right?
Mr. Otis, okay, invented the automatic mechanical brake or braking system for elevators so that when they went up, even if the rope broke, they would stop instead of plunging all the way down. Well, that's great, but they didn't have an automatic door to go with it. So while the elevator wasn't
Right.
going to crash to the
Right.
bottom,
Right.
you might. And this fellow's daughter saw this happen, and he invented an automatic door locking system for elevators.
And now we use the elevators
Mhm.
everywhere. You
Yep.
know, there's so much. I was just so puzzled
Mm-hmm.
to see so many inventions, including the telephone, including the fact that we're using the cell phone.
Central
there's
heat.
Central heating system in our homes. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like amazing for people that were not allowed to go to school or to learn to read and write, and to suddenly go to school and be so creative and create all these wonderful things, the ironing board, the
Mhm.
the children's buggy, as we
Mhm.
call them.
Yeah.
It's we wouldn't be able to take babies around if we didn't have those push
Mhm.
chairs, and it's incredible.
Well, something that I missed over because I started to riff, and that is I developed 3 different categories for Black American inventors. Basically early, middle, and late being now.
Well, go ahead.
And the first inventors, these are the guys that I really like, because we're talking in the 1700s.
That's right.
What can a black person invent in the 1700s that's useful to a white person, especially when they're illiterate?
Go ahead. I'm
Okay?
curious.
And the next hint is, the ones who did this were getting up there in age.
They had time to think about it.
No, they had been medicine men, witch doctors, or whatever in Africa.
Oh,
And
right.
they
They brought
came
their
over-
knowledge
they
of
came over
herbs. Knowledge of
To the
herbs.
United States, and 4 of them in particular did such a good job that they were manumitted. That means they were freed. And the things that they invented were, excuse me while I take off my glasses so I can see. The people that, this is the wrong page. So in Virginia, there was a gentleman who invented, let's see. He was freed. He created a treatment for skin and sexually transmitted diseases. The Virginia state legislature freed him and paid him for his work.
Ah,
That's pretty intense. And that was
is
back in
incredible.
1729.
I did not know that. I knew I had to bring you on the show because we all need to learn these details.
Well, you've heard of Cotton Mather,
Yes.
okay? And and this is very, very true. One of the reasons that literacy was punished so severely was because on the other side of the coin, if the slaves can read and they can escape, well, that's bad. But if the slaves stay and communicate and foster an uprising, now we have a big problem. So in, let's see, 1729, there was a fellow named Papin. That's all we have for his name. And he created a treatment, we did Papin. But when Papin wrote that, developed that cure, that same year, another freed slave wrote a document that advocated the violent uprising and throwing off the shackles of the master. And 2 years later, Nat Turner did just that. So the proof was in the pudding.
Absolutely.
If the black population can read, they're going to revolt.
Absolutely.
So this is life and death. Cotton Mather was terrified of that, and he was a brutal racist. And his man, Onesimus, let's see, he came up with a remedy for smallpox. Now, the thing that makes that remedy so startling, what he did is basically how they cured smallpox.
That's right.
You find someone who's infected, okay, and you find someone who isn't. And you make a cut on the arm of the uninfected person, and you wipe the pus from one of the sores for the infected person on it. Bang, this person's cured.
That's the beginning of the vaccine. Right?
And yeah, and so this man was illiterate, he was an ex-slave, and I believe Mather finally freed him at the end of his life, but I doubt it was out of any great sense of gratitude, because he really didn't like Africans. He
Right.
just didn't.
Right.
And then
Wow.
there was a guy named Caesar, 1749. He created a poison and snakebite remedy. The state freed him. In 1755, there's a man named Samson in South Carolina, also. And rattlesnake remedy made of heart snake root, polypody, Avon's root, and rum.
Wow.
Okay?
What a combination.
Yeah.
And it's just, I'm just so fascinated. I cannot mention all the names, but when I was reading through how many inventors didn't even take advantage of their inventions, most of them were allowed to file a patent, but some of them had to forego it because, I mean, they had to forego the commercial benefit of their invention because then a white man, because women were relegated to,
Yeah.
you know.
We know what
still,
women are.
Women are still, I need to have a show to talk about women and how they've been relegated to the dustbin of history. We try to raise our heads, and it's always a fight for women. And I have to say that black men got the right to vote before white women got the right to vote. So you can see here the pattern of oppression that we kind of created and humanity created, you know, from the beginning. You feel like if you don't oppress, you can't thrive. So you have to oppress a certain minority in order for you to progress. And that we'll have another show to talk about women. But how did this impact the African American men and women of today? Not the ones that were the inventors, didn't take advantage so much of their invention. A, because they couldn't even find jobs, and let alone create their own businesses. So this created the poverty that people associate with African Americans, that they are poorer than the rest of the population. I mean, not to talk about housing discrimination and so forth that happen, but not taking advantage of your invention. I mean, today we have the Elon Musks of this world.
Yeah.
You know, we have you know, Mike Zuckerberg with Facebook and so forth. There were so many inventors. I mean, I'm thinking about Dr.
Julian?
The chemist,
Dr. Julian?
Dr. Julian.
Yeah.
Dr. Julian invented the cortisone that
Yep.
helps people with pain, and he had so many inventions, and
Oh, yeah.
a man like him had to go to Austria to use the labs in Europe, to then come back to the United States, and even trying to get a job was hard. His assistant went, a story I like to tell, is that he went with his assistant and to apply for jobs and to a company, and the company gave a job to his assistant who was white, and he, the inventor and the boss, did not get the job because they said, you know, you're a colored man. I mean, what is this all about?
So, but here's what he did. He synthesized cysotigmine for the treatment of glaucoma and synthesized cortisone for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis.
That's right.
He's also known to have invented a foam fire extinguisher for gasoline and fuel oil fires. He also synthesized female and male hormones, extracting progesterone and testosterone.
So we'd have no testosterone or estrogen treatment today if it hadn't been for Dr. Julian.
And extracting sterols from soybean oils, and received dozens of honors after his career. So there's some people, I use the term idea factory. Dr. Julian was an idea factory. He understood the area in which he worked, and the things that he worked with, he was able to look over the horizon in some cases and see uses for them. That's brilliance. And the fact is, he didn't give up.
He never gave up.
He just didn't
the
give up.
story that I liked the best was when he finally got employment, and he was the head of department at a big company.
Yep.
He then became more prosperous and moved to a white neighborhood. And
That's a
moving
trip.
to a white neighborhood was a big deal, and it still is. I mean, there's white flight. If black people move in, white people move out. I mean, this happens, I mean, even in Europe. I lived in Sweden, and I know
Yep.
that there's this idea that if black people move into a neighborhood, the house prices go down, so people move. They go, well, we don't want to, we don't want to deal
Yep.
with that. But he was prosperous
Yep.
because he was an inventor, and he was the head of a department for a big company. And he moved his company to I think it's in Maryland, into a very prosperous community.
Yep.
And what happened? They tried to,
Take his company from him.
not only that, they tried to burn his house.
Yep.
And when one time he got a little bit of time off, because this was a workaholic, somebody who worked all the time. And when he took his wife out on a short trip and left the children with the babysitter, they tried to burn his house down
Well,
twice. And he never gave up. He stayed in the neighborhood in spite of the
should I
death threats.
should I throw in a sidebar here?
Go ahead.
Okay. So in 1960, when we moved to New Hampshire in 1957, we knew there were going to be people that didn't like us. But the main thing is, when you look at 100 people, about 95 of them don't care that you're black or white, or they like you or they don't. Okay? So there's now the final 5%. And then there's 4%. They're going to mouth off, harass you in public. And then there's the 1%. So in my book, I have to write about the 1% because they are the ones that basically had us living in fear for a bunch of years.
That's right.
And in 1961, after my father retired from the Navy, I mean, they'd called before. We'd get this call saying, you've got 15 minutes to get out of the house
Oh my goodness.
because we're coming to burn it down.
Oh my gosh. Is this in Lee, New
This
Hampshire?
is in Lee, New Hampshire.
Oh my
And
goodness.
when my dad
Yes.
came home,
Yes.
the same thing happened, except we were sitting around the living room watching TV. The phone rang. Mom picked it up. This guy said something obscene to her, and my dad grabbed the phone and threatened the guy. And my mom went off on him because you're working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. You don't even have a gun. And my dad finally got a chance to man an anti-aircraft weapon in the Navy in 1957. In World War II, he couldn't touch a weapon because it was illegal for black men to touch weapons or ammunition because they would have been court-martialed. So he went out and bought a single-shot .22. I already knew how to shoot, but, you know, not anything serious. And he set up a target 120 feet away from on top of our hill down the hill into the dip. And he had me out there go through a box of 22 long rifle hollow points every Saturday morning between 10 and 1 in the afternoon. So I'd be standing up on top of this hill, and since the whole area was farmed, we didn't have all these tree stands, it was all fields. And I'd be standing up there on top of this hill, banging away through a box of 50. Finally, somebody came up and watched me shoot, and they said, oh. And he told me I was a good shot. I said, well, thank you. I didn't know who he was. And he drove off, and he went down to the American Legion, and my dad came back and gave me $1 because the man said, do you have a young boy shooting targets up on top of the hill on Lee Hook? And Dad goes, yeah. Guy says, that boy can shoot. He bought my dad a beer. And the man told the Legion that young wad up on the Hook Road can shoot like a bastard. And the phone call stopped. But the fact is, when you're black in this state, or any state, and you're the first or the only, you have to always have or be ready for something unexpected.
And as you said, it's 1%. Because, you know, the reason why we live here is that 99% of all Caucasian people
Well, we
are
certainly
very
don't live here.
good people.
Yeah, we certainly don't live here for the heat.
But there's 1% that stir the pot and
Yeah.
cause all the problems.
So-
and that's very sad that they get to actually be in charge of the message that's given out. But let's move on to
Sure.
your writings.
Yeah.
I read some of your poems. Do you want to read one of your poems?
Uh,
Or do you want to sing for us? Because you're also a singer.
Yeah, well, to tell you the truth, My voice is a little ratchety today.
So what about a poem?
Yeah, I can read you a poem.
That would be nice.
Let's see.
Thank you.
Let's see if I have any poems. Oh, okay. So I write for events, and I
Yes.
write for myself.
Yes.
And the thing is, for me, poetry is just something I do to blow out some emotion. It's not necessarily planned. I don't wake up and say, I'm going to write a poem today. I'll wake up in the morning
Right.
and I'll see something on the news and it'll trigger something. And next thing I know, I'll be writing poems. And the interesting thing is, I didn't even think about reading it or publishing it or whatever because it's just stuff that I did. Well, I let some of it out of the box and people are saying, oh, Mike, would you like to come and read some poetry to us? I'm like, huh? So,
And that's what I'm doing here.
Okay.
We want to hear. It's so nice that you have that
so
very creative part of you.
well, I didn't know that Luisa was going to ask me for poetry, but I do have a piece from something I put together last fall. It was called Black Men's Poetry. It was a combination of two other poets, and we read at a gathering. And most of these poems are written sometime between 3, 4, and 5 in the morning when I wake up and something hits me. So this was back during the George Floyd mayhem.
That's right.
And originally I called it 4 a.m. Reflection.
And George Floyd was the African American man that was killed
Was
by
kneeled
the
on.
police with a knee over his neck
Mhm.
in
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee
Okay. But I changed the
2
name
years ago.
because I felt 4 a.m. Reflection was a little too bland. The Maytag cycle, or wash, rinse, and repeat. Black American history can be viewed as a cynical manifestation of misery. When Black America feared lynching, white America shook its head. So sad, what a shame. Black America battled heroin. White America snickered about junkies. What else can you expect? Black America protested police brutality. White America exclaimed, "That's not right," and turned the page. Black America rejected ghetto life, prisons without bars, and burned them down. White America said, "My God, they are savages." In the summer of 1968, when Black America feared white supremacists, white America shook its head and yawned. Black America was still incarcerated for crack. White America shrieked, "We need treatment for opioids." Black America peacefully protested George Floyd. White America hijacked his cause and took to the streets in dissent until night, when the anarchists came in the spring of 2020.
Wow.
And
Beautiful.
just so you know,
Thank
it hurts to write that.
It does.
Because-
We were all in pain. It was a very momentous and painful time for everybody.
Well, the thing is,
People of all nationalities, all creeds, all over the world were in pain.
well, this is the problem is, it's a cyclical occurrence. Every 30 years, the inner cities explode for the same reasons. Police brutality becomes the accelerant for a conflagration caused by poor employment opportunities and even worse education. And people are locked into a cycle where a father grows up to see his children stuck in exactly the same place he was. There's
Yes.
no room for improvement.
Do you have some excerpts or portions of a sort of guideline you sent to high schools on education?
Yeah, I'll get it off my phone. I didn't bring it.
Sure.
Okay.
But you can talk
Okay.
about
But
it.
actually-
and you know,
This is something a little easier.
Because it's so important to educate people so that we achieve unity. Because what I believe is that we're in need of being united and to be. We have a couple of minutes left,
Sure.
and I am wondering if you could talk a little bit about it, because we need education, and I think once people are educated, they can talk. It's okay to disagree, but it's not okay to fight.
Yep.
Because we're all Americans. And in the meantime, we have outside powers. We have China getting stronger and stronger and probably taking over the world. China is unstoppable. They have more people. They have over 1 billion people. They're a bigger nation. So
there is a question, and if you look at India, you can see part of it. Once a country gets up to like 1 billion people, it is hard to manage. And China should become the dominant force or whatever in the world if they can hold their country together. And I don't say that idly. I say it because it's hard. And you can only spend so much of your national resources holding your country together by force and intimidation.
that's right.
And that's why they censor the West so heavily, because like the slaves, they don't want them to hear that there's something different over the horizon.
We have 30 seconds for you to
Okay.
tell us about this.
Well, I wrote this
high
seminar
school seminar.
for high school and junior high school students because as they step into the area of transition, they have questions that they're either afraid to ask or can't ask for one reason or another, and the school's not answering them. So the topics I hit were imbuing self-confidence. Do what you want to do, not what everyone else does. And you must be resilient and persistent. Depression is real. If you're depressed for a long time, see someone. If a friend of yours is depressed, tell someone who can help, because you'd rather graduate with them than go to their funeral. Also, learn to communicate with people other than your peers. Honesty is a perpetual. So is lying. Which one is going to help you more in the long run? Kindness is a choice. You can be a nice person or you can be a joke. You can choose. Guns are unnecessary. If you need a gun to go to school, talk to the police. If you're taking your gun to school because you're going to impress somebody, you've got the wrong friends. If the gun falls out of your backpack or you lose it and someone uses it to commit the crime, you are going to jail. If you feel that having a gun, you're going to go there and settle something, you don't need to do that because you don't want to spend the rest of your life in jail. And if you have it when the police show up, they may kill you, and it will be justified. But to conclude, coexistence. You're not going to like everybody that you meet in life. It's impossible. But that doesn't give you the excuse of making their life miserable because you can. That's just bullying, and that's not acceptable. The world works because people work together, and you don't have to love someone to work with them.
Absolutely.
You don't have to go home and hang out, but if you've got a job to do, you get it done. So, in short, live and let live. Let other people, give other people the same benefit of the doubt that you give yourself. Say, I'll treat people the way I want to be respected and treated. And things work a lot easier that way.
And that's exactly how I come to the end of the show asking what matters most. What you've just described is what matters most. Treating others the way you'd like to be treated. That should be enough. That should be our motto for all of us. And with that, we come to the end of one more What Matters Most. Please join us next month. Our guest today was Michael Ward. Michael, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
coming on the show.
Thank you much. And check out sketchesoflee.com. I do all kinds of interesting
That's right.
stuff.
Any other links you would like to
No,
give?
just go to Sketches of Lee and you'll see
Pretty
much everything, yeah.
Material, sketchesoflee.com.
All right.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to Aaron Barry for being our editor and director, and for Alan, and we have Helen Varelli, who has been faithfully helping us with this show. Thank you for being behind not only the cameras but in the studio over there, helping with the sound. And I also have another volunteer today, Wayne. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks, Wayne.
And with that, we come to the end of What Matters Most, and I want you back.
Okay,
Promise to
that's
come
no
back.
problem. Sure.
Lovely. Thank you.